Welcome to a fireside reading of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 44, Part 2. One of our first feats in the housekeeping way was a little dinner for Traddles. I met him in town and asked him to walk out with me that afternoon. He readily consenting, I wrote to Dora, saying I would bring him home. It was pleasant weather, and on the road we made my domestic happiness the theme of conversation. Traddles was very full of it, and said that picturing himself with such a home, and Sophie waiting and preparing for him, he could think of nothing wanting to complete his bliss. I could not have wished for a prettier little wife at the opposite end of the table, but I certainly could have wished, when we sat down, for a little more room. I did not know how it was, but though there were only two of us, we were at once always cramped for room, and yet had always room enough to lose everything. I suspect it may have been because nothing had a place of its own, except Jip's pagoda, which invariably blocked up the main thoroughfare. On the present occasion, Traddles was so hemmed in by the pagoda and the guitar case and Dora's flower painting and my writing table that I had serious doubts of the possibility of he using his knife and fork. But he protested with his own good humour, "Oceans of room, Copperfield. I assure you, oceans." There was another thing I could have wished, namely that Jip had never been encouraged to walk about the tablecloth during dinner. I began to think there was something disorderly in his being there at all, even if he'd not been in the habit of putting his foot in the salt or the melted butter. On this occasion he seemed to think he was expressly introduced to keep Traddles at bay, and he barked at my old friend and made short runs at his plate with such undaunted pertinacity that he may be said to have engrossed the conversation. However, as I knew how tender-hearted my dear Dora was, and how sensitive she would be to any slight upon her favourite, I hinted no objection. For similar reasons, I made no allusion to the skirmishing plates upon the floor, or to the disreputable appearance of the casters, which were all at 6s and 7s, and looked drunk, or to the further blockade of Traddles by wandering vegetable dishes and jugs. I could not help wondering in my own mind, as I contemplated the boiled leg of mutton before me, previous to carving it, how it came to pass that our joints of meat were of such extraordinary shapes, and whether our butcher contracted for all the deformed sheep that came into the world. But I kept my reflections to myself. "My love," said I to Dora, "what have you got in that dish?" I could not imagine why Dora had been making tempting little faces at me as if she wanted to kiss me. "Oysters, dear," said Dora timidly. "Was that your thought?" said I, delighted. Yes, Dodie," said Dora. "There never was a happier one," I exclaimed, laying down the carving knife and fork. "There is nothing Traddles likes so much." Yes, Dodie," said Dora. "And so I bought a beautiful little barrel of them, and the man said they were very good, but I am afraid there's something the matter with them. They don't seem right." Here Dora shook her head, and diamonds twinkled in her eyes. "They are only opened in both shells," said I. "Take the top one off, my love." "But it won't come off," said Dora, trying very hard and looking very much distressed. "Do you know, Copperfield," said Traddles, cheerfully examining the dish, "I think it is in consequence— they are capital oysters, but I think it is in consequence of their never having been opened." They never had been opened, and we had no oyster knives and couldn't have used them if we had. So we looked at the oysters and ate the mutton. At least we ate as much of it as was done and made up with capers. If I had permitted him, I'm satisfied that Traddles would have made a perfect savage of himself and eaten a plateful of raw meat to express enjoyment of the repast, but I would hear of no such immolation on the altar of friendship, and we had a course of bacon instead, there happening, by good fortune, to be cold bacon in the larder. My poor little wife was in such affliction when she thought I should be annoyed, and in such a state of joy when she found I was not, that the discomfiture I had subdued very soon vanished, and we passed a happy evening. Dora sitting with her arm on my chair while Traddles and I discussed a glass of wine, and taking every opportunity of whispering in my ear that it was so good of me not to be a cruel, cross old boy. By and by she made tea for us, which it was so pretty to see her do, as if she was busying herself with a set of dolls' tea things, that I was not particular about the quality of the beverage. Then Traddles and I played a game or two at cribbage, and Dora singing to the guitar, the while it seemed to me as if our courtship and marriage were a tender dream of mine, and the night when I first listened to her voice were not yet over. When Traddles went away and I came back into the parlour from seeing him out, my wife planted her chair close to mine and sat down by my side. "I am very sorry," she said. "Will you try to teach me, Dodie?" "I must teach myself first, Dora," said I. "I'm as bad as you, love." "Ah, but you can learn," she returned, "and you are a clever, clever man." "Nonsense, Mouse," said I. "I wish," resumed my wife after a long silence, "that I could have gone down into the country for a whole year and lived with Agnes." Her hands were clasped upon my shoulder, and her chin rested on them, and her blue eyes looked quietly into mine. "Why so?" I asked. "I think she might have improved me, and I think I might have learned from her," said Dora. "All in good time, my love. Agnes has had her father to take care of these many years. You should remember, even when she was quite a child, she was the Agnes whom we know," said I. "Will you call me a name I want you to call me?" inquired Dora, without moving. "What is it?" I asked with a smile. "It's a stupid name," she said, shaking her curls for a moment. "Child wife." I laughingly asked my child wife what her fancy was in desiring to be so called. She answered without moving, otherwise than as the arm I twined about her may have brought her blue eyes nearer to me. "I don't mean, you silly fellow, that you should use the name instead of Dora. I only mean that you should think of me that way. When you're going to be angry with me, say to yourself, 'It's only my child wife.' When I'm very disappointing, say, 'I knew a long time ago that she would make but a child wife.' When you miss what I should like to be and I think can never be, say, 'Still my foolish child wife loves me,' for indeed I do." I had not been serious with her, having no idea until now that she was serious herself. But her affectionate nature was so happy in what I now said to her with my whole heart, that her face became a laughing one before her glittering eyes were dry. She was soon my child wife, indeed, sitting down on the floor outside the Chinese house, ringing all the little bells one after another to punish Jip for his recent bad behavior, while Jip lay blinking in the doorway with his head out, even too lazy to be teased. This appeal of Dora's made a strong impression on me. I look back on the time I write of. I invoke the innocent figure that I dearly loved to come out from the mists and shadows of the past and turn its gentle head towards me once again. And I can still declare that this one little speech was constantly in my memory. I may not have used it to the best account. I was young and inexperienced, but I never turned a deaf ear to its artless pleading. Dora told me shortly afterwards that she was going to be a wonderful housekeeper. Accordingly, she polished the tablets, pointed the pencil, bought an immense account book, carefully stitched up with a needle and thread all the leaves of the cookery book which Jip had torn, and made quite a desperate little attempt to be good, as she called it. But the figures had the old obstinate propensity. They would not add up. When she had entered 2 or 3 laborious items in the account book, Jip would walk over the page, wagging his tail, and smear them all out. Her own little right-hand middle finger got steeped to the very bone in ink, and I think that was the only decided result obtained. Sometimes of an evening when I was at home and at work, for I wrote a good deal now and was beginning in a small way to be known as a writer, I would lay down my pen and watch my child wife trying to be good. First of all, she would bring out the immense account book and lay it down upon the table with a deep sigh. Then she would open it at the place where Jip had made it illegible last night, and call Jip up to look at his misdeeds. This would occasion a diversion in Jip's favour and some inking of his nose, perhaps as a penalty. Then she would tell Jip to lie down on the table instantly, like a lion, which was one of his tricks, though I cannot say the likeness was striking. And if he were in an obedient humour, he would obey. Then she would take up a pen and begin to write, and find a hair in it. Then she would take up another pen and begin to write, and find that it sputtered. Then she would take up another pen and begin to write, and say in a low voice, "Oh, it's a talking pen, and will disturb Dodie." And then she would give it up as a bad job and put the account book away after pretending to crush the lion with it. Or if she were in a very sedate and serious state of mind, she would sit down with the tablets and a little basket of bills and other documents, which looked more like curl papers than anything else, and endeavour to get some result out of them. After severely comparing one with another and making entries on the tablets and blotting them out and counting all the fingers on her left hand over and over again, backwards and forwards, she would be so vexed and discouraged and would look so unhappy that it gave me pain to see her bright face clouded, and for me, and I would go softly to her and say, "What's the matter, Dora?" Dora would look up hopelessly and reply, "They won't come right. They make my head ache so, and they won't do anything I want." Then I would say, "Now let us try together. Let me show you, Dora." Then I would commence a practical demonstration to which Dora would pay profound attention, perhaps for 5 minutes, when she would begin to be dreadfully tired and would lighten the subject by curling my hair or trying the effect of my face with my shirt collar turned down. If I tacitly checked this playfulness and persisted, she would look so scared and disconsolate as she became more and more bewildered that the remembrance of her natural gaiety when I first strayed into her path, and of her being my child wife, would come reproachfully upon me, and I would lay the pencil down and call for the guitar. I had a great deal of work to do, and had many anxieties, but the same considerations made me keep them to myself. I am far from sure now that it was right to do this, but I did it for my child wife's sake. I search my breast, and I commit its secrets, if I know them, without any reservation to this paper. The old unhappy loss or want of something had, I am conscious, some place in my heart, but not to the embitterment of my life. When I walked alone in the fine weather and thought of the summer days when all the air had been filled with my boyish enchantment, I did miss something of the realization of my dreams, but I thought it was a softened glory of the past, which nothing could have thrown upon the present time. I did feel sometimes for a little while that I could have wished my wife had been my counselor, had had more character and purpose to sustain me and improve me by, had been endowed with power to fill up the void which somewhere seemed to be about me. But I felt as if this were an unearthly consummation of my happiness that never had been meant to be and never could have been. I was a boyish husband as to years. I had known the softening influence of no other sorrows or experiences than those recorded in these leaves. If I did any wrong, as I may have done much, I did it in mistaken love and in my want of wisdom. I write the exact truth. It would avail me nothing to extenuate it now. Thus it was that I took upon myself the toils and cares of our life, and had no partner in them. We lived much as before, in reference to our scrambling household arrangements, but I had got used to those, and Dora, I was pleased to see, was seldom vexed now. She was bright and cheerful in the old childish way, loved me dearly, and was happy with her old trifles. When the debates were heavy, I mean as to length, not quality, for in the last respect they were not often otherwise, and I went home late, Dora would never rest when she heard my footsteps, but would always come downstairs to meet me. When my evenings were unoccupied by the pursuit of which I had qualified myself with so much pains, and I was engaged in writing at home, she would sit quietly near me, however late the hour, and be so mute that I would often think she had dropped asleep. But generally, when I raised my head, I saw her blue eyes looking at me with the quiet attention of which I have already spoken. "Oh, what a weary boy," said Dora one night, when I met her eyes as I was shutting up my desk. "What a weary girl," said I. "That's more to the purpose. You must go to bed another time, my love. It's far too late for you." "No, don't send me to bed," pleaded Dora, coming to my side. "Pray don't do that." Dora, to my amazement, she was sobbing on my neck. "Not well, my dear? Not happy?" "Yes, quite well and very happy," said Dora. "But say you'll let me stop and see you write." "Why, what a sight for such bright eyes at midnight," I replied. "Are they bright, though?" returned Dora, laughing. "I'm so glad they're bright." "Little vanity," said I. But it was not vanity. It was only harmless delight in my admiration. I knew that very well before she told me so. "If you think them pretty, say I may always stop and see you write," said Dora. "Do you think them pretty?" "Very pretty." "Then let me always stop and see you write." "I am afraid that won't improve their brightness, Dora." "Yes, it will, because, you clever boy, you'll not forget me then while you are full of silent fancies. Will you mind it if I say something very, very silly, more than usual?" inquired Dora, peeping over my shoulder into my face. "What wonderful thing is that?" said I. "Please, let me hold the pens," said Dora. "I want to have something to do with all those many hours when you are so industrious. May I hold the pens?" The remembrance of her pretty joy when I said yes brings tears into my eyes. The next time I sat down to write, and regularly afterwards, she sat in her old place with a spare bundle of pens at her side. Her triumph in this connection with my work, and her delight when I wanted a new pen, which I very often feigned to do, suggested to me a new way of pleasing my child wife. I occasionally made a pretense of wanting a page or two of manuscript copied. Then Dora was in her glory. The preparations she made for this great work, the aprons she put on, the bibs she borrowed from the kitchen to keep off the ink, the time she took, the innumerable stoppages she made to have a laugh with Jip as if he understood it all, her conviction that her work was incomplete unless she signed her name at the end, and the way in which she would bring it to me like a school copy, and then, when I praised it, clasped me round the neck, are touching recollections to me, simple as they might appear to other men. She took possession of the keys soon after this and went jingling about the house with the whole bunch in a little basket tied to her slender waist. I seldom found that the places to which they belonged were locked, or that they were of any use except as a plaything for Jip, but Dora was pleased, and that pleased me. She was quite satisfied that a good deal was effected by this make-believe of housekeeping, and was as merry as if we'd been keeping a baby house for a joke. So we went on. Dora was hardly less affectionate to my aunt than to me, and often told her of the time when she was afraid she was a cross old thing. I never saw my aunt unbend more systematically to anyone. She courted Jip, though Jip never responded, listened day after day to the guitar, though I am afraid she had no taste for music, never attacked the incapables, though the temptation must have been severe, went wonderful distances on foot to purchase as surprises any trifles that she found out Dora wanted, and never came in by the garden and missed her from the room, but she would call out at the foot of the stairs in a voice that sounded cheerfully all over the house, "Where's Little Blossom?" Thanks so much for joining me. I was thinking about how he wrote a note to his wife, and she got it before he came home for dinner. Before texts, there was a way to communicate almost instantly, or at least enough time to get home for dinner and have dinner on the table for Traddles. Fascinating that we don't have that, but we have what we have now. I look forward very much to seeing you again soon, same time and place, 5 Pacific, at Fireside Reading on Instagram, live, all the chapters uploaded to the YouTube channel Fireside Reading, so you can watch and listen in your own time. I also upload a synopsis in case you don't have time to watch the whole thing, but want to be catched up for the next live reading. Please comment and subscribe and like if you do like. I love getting those. Until I see, oh no, I'm not reading tomorrow. Sorry. I'm not going to see you tomorrow. So no reading tomorrow. Sorry, this is the 3rd day this week. There's been a lot going on. But I think after tomorrow we have a good stretch. So not tomorrow, but I am reading thereafter on Friday Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All right. I look forward to seeing you then. Until then, please stay very well. Good night.